Sorry about that, guys. Okay, that started. So let me share the link just to make sure that you guys can see as well. Makes sense. So that's it. So we have my array. So let's say I want to remove one element. My phone is ringing, but I can't even know where it is. Okay. Sorry, guys. So want to remove one element. So definitely there's an array method you can use, and it's called pop. So not pop state event. So when you use this pop keyword, with the array using the dot notation, that is, can you guys remember what the prototype means? Basically, you know what the prototype is now. Hello. If you can talk, just write it in the chat. Like, when I said okay, the prototype of either an object or an array, you know what that means. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, what does a prototype contain?
I think they are the available methods that are already in the JavaScript. Like it's always being popped. You can just click it. You see different.
They come.
Methods that we can use.
Yeah, they come by default with non-primitive data types. So whether it's an array or an object, or a math object, or whatever it is, or even like a non-primitive data type, basically. So they come shipped in. So when we're talking about instance property, and we're talking about what's it called, static properties. So we have static properties being the properties that, okay, when you create a new array, so even if I create another array and I say let my array 2, and I make it an empty array, even if I console.log my console.log my array 2, even if I do that, you will see that my array 2 is still going to share the same prototype. So it will still have its own prototype even if there's nothing inside of it. So all of these are also part of the array. So these ones are by default a part of the array, but every other thing I will add in, just like this 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 are now instance properties. So they are properties that are pertaining to only this instance of the array in my JavaScript program. So they are only pertaining to array 1. So there can be different types of arrays with their own respective instance properties, but the static properties is what you have inside of the prototype that are more like a default kind of property. And the reason why you have those is just so that you can have some very useful methods, and methods basically are just already made functions that are a part of your JavaScript program or a part of a JavaScript environment. So you have those properties so that you can easily do some activities like as fast as possible without having to write your own code for those activities from the scratch. So an example is this pop, which you will find inside of the array prototype. So there's a pop keyword inside of the prototype, and what a pop keyword does whenever we apply to the array. So you can see that here in our array we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. So but when I do console.log my array dot pop, which is what I have here, if I should do this and I save it on line 743, you will see that the program will have what it does is it just pops the last element of that array and returns it to us. So you can see it returns the last element from an array and returns that particular element. Does that make sense? Hello.
Yes, sir.
So you understand what I mean by return, right? Like when I say return a value, that means that function at the end of the day we consolidate into a single value, right? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so when you're using something like Visual Studio Code, definitely you will see what's it called, a helper. Like whenever you hover on top of a method like this, you will see a dialog on top telling you what the function does. If that's not clear enough, you can still go to Google and just look it up to know what the pop really does. So it removes the last element. So if 10 wasn't the last element, let's say the last element was 9, when you do console.log my array.pop, it is going to return 9 to you because 9 is the last element. So it's basically removing it from that array, and then it's kind of just logging it, returning that particular item it removes from the array. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's what the pop keyword does. So there's another key, yet another keyword. Let me just put this on top of each other, and you can see that my array now stops at 8. The element has already been removed. Do you get the point? So the pop keyword has removed 9 from the array, returns the number removed. Then when I console.log the new array, I don't see that element that was removed anymore. The pop keyword already removes the last element from the array, but it doesn't just stop there, it also returns that value of what it removes. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so
please come again.
Okay, so the pop keyword, let's say you have an array. It doesn't matter how many elements are inside of the array. When you do that array name dot, you remember the dot notation now, dot pop, what that does is that it will target the very last element inside of the array, whether it is 9 or 10 or 2 million. As long as that is the last element of the array, it will remove it from the original array. You get the point? But it also makes something useful happen. It will now hold the value inside of that function, that you can now use the value itself to do any other thing you want to do. But ultimately, when you log out that same array, or you try to check it out, maybe output it in any other place, you realize that that element, the last element of that array, will not be on the array anymore. It has already been removed using the pop keyword. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's what the pop keyword does. So array.pop. So the pop keyword removes the last element of an array, and you don't need to pass in any argument to it. Just call it like this. It's just going to remove it, and you don't have to do console.log. I just did console.log to show you the fact that it will return that value to you. Does that make sense? So even if I do my array.pop and I don't console.log, you can see that even the last element still doesn't exist in it. And even if I make 8 the last element and I still do the same thing and I save, you will see that 7 is now the last element. It already removed 8 technically. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And then the reason why this, you can actually see that we are doing this, unlike when we're dealing with JavaScript strings, when we did to uppercase and when we logged the same string inside of the console, we don't see that the to uppercase affects the original string. And that's why I tell you that primitive data types are not mutable, that is, you cannot alter them. But you can see here that we're actually using this method, alter the value of this original array, and yet the original array now returns a different kind of value entirely. You get the point, without us having to reassign it. But if it's a primitive data type like strings or numbers or thereabout, we'll have to reassign it to be able to reflect the new value. Does that make sense? Hello?
Sir.
Does it?
Yes, it makes sense.
Yeah. Does any other person, like, maybe, like, is it clear for everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here, so let's go to the next array method. So let me just comment out the pop keyword. So now you know what the pop keyword does. Any day, anytime, you can understand what the pop keyword does. Just the last element, it removes it, and then it can return it to you. So, and the idea of returning it means, let's say after using the pop keyword, let's say this array, you don't even know what this array is, but it just, it's more like a list of 10 people. Like maybe, okay, let me give you a practical example. Let's say this is the list of scores of students in your class, but the student has scored the lowest. You don't want him to promote, you don't want him to go to GSS2. Let's say this is GSS1 final exam. So whoever gets the last score, you just want the person to automatically not move to the next class. So, but by the way, let's say you don't even have a record of all the scores. So when you do array.pop, even when it removes that last element, you can still access and know what element was removed, because the pop keyword will return that element that was removed to you. Does that make sense? So now you see, like, that's more like a practical example of that. So is it clear now with that illustration?
Hello? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's why you might need to care about returning the value from an operation, because you probably will be curious. You want to know, because not every time will you will not always be dealing with data that you created. You will be dealing with data that maybe some other developer created and it's in another database. Then you are just calling an endpoint that returns that data. You will not always be familiar with the data you are dealing with. So most times you always want to know what is inside of a data before you even do anything with it at all. So in the case of having to remove the last element, you also might want to store a reference of that last element that was removed. So here we can say, okay, we can say let's repeating student repeating student, be equal to my array, dot pop, because the repeating student is the student that got the last, is the student that, according to Yoruba people, that is the one that scored the lowest. So you want to, log you want to be able to track him, so that you tell the next class teacher that don't allow so person, graduate from, or maybe join your next class. So we can say console.log, repeating student, and then we also console.log, let's call this one graduating student. So we can, does that make sense now? I think that context is a little bit clearer than what it was before. What is that? Okay, say my array is not defined. Okay, it's not my array anymore. It's now what? Graduating student. So let's save that. So you can see repeating student is the student with the math number 8, or maybe score 8. Then the graduating student are students with 1 to 7 are graduating student, but the repeating student is the student with the 8 score, or maybe the 8th position. Does that make sense now? So you might want to care about what is being returned, because you might need to use that value to track whoever repeats, or in your case it might not be repeating student, it might be the last, maybe the last person in an array of your friends, or the last eatery in an array of your preferred eateries, or something like that. It could be anything. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, does it makes perfect sense now? I believe it makes sense now. Okay, so let's comment this out. So removing an element from an array. So let me just kind of bring this down, and let me kind of bring this here as well. So let's do the next one. So here adding one element to the end of your array. So that's done with array.push. So when you do push, it will add an element to the end of your array. So here we can say let's say we want to say let's carry over, or maybe on, let's say, new session, or maybe let's say new student, and let's say new student is going to be equal to, let's say new student is equal to 9. So we can now say let's the same graduating student we have now, want to add the new student. Maybe this student is just a new student joining the classroom. He's coming from another school, but he's supposed to be in primary 2 as well. But we have to be able to add him to the list of graduating students, because they will all be in the same class eventually, right? But we've already removed the repeating student, right? So we are adding the graduating student, and the way we can do that is using the array method. We can do graduating student dot push. So but this one is not just the type that we don't pass. Remember here we didn't pass in any argument to this function, to this method. Remember, when we do anything like this, we are passing an argument. But this pop does not require any argument. It just targets the last element. But here, when we do dot push, it wants to know what we are trying to push. So what we want to push in here is we want to push in the new student. So you can see here, it said it appends, it appends new elements to the end of an array and returns the new length of the array. Does that make sense? So here, this one returns what it removed, but this one returns the length of the new array. So if I should do a console.log of this value now, and please guys, I beg you in the name of God, just call me back if you think I'm going too fast or you don't understand what I'm saying. So let me save this now. Oh, that's crazy. That's a crazy syntax. So let me save this. So you can see here we have 8. Definitely what we added to the array is 9, right? And I think I this is very crazy, because I use this a lot of times, but I don't actually consider the fact that what it returns is different from what you are adding when you do array.push. So what it returns here is the length of this array. Does that make sense? Hello? But don't be deceived. It has already added the element to the array, just that it will return the length of the new array that it has created. So if I come down here and say console.log, what's that called? Graduating students. So let's see that. So you can see now 9 is now added to it. So we now have our new students in our new session, and they are going to be learning together. Does that make sense? But the student that didn't do so well is repeating and is not being added, because we've already popped him out of the champagne, or popped him out of the class. So now we push the new student that is just enrolling in our school, and everybody's happy. Are you guys happy? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
I think we need to be swearing an oath in this class that we say the truth and the truth alone. Laura, I think you need to be doing the swearing for us. Everybody touch your Bible before we start the class. You just carry your Bible or your Quran or whatever. Just put your hands on it and say, "I will witness to the truth and the truth alone." And that's good. That kind of thing. So Laura, you help us with that going forward from tomorrow. Hello.
Hello, sir. I
Okay.
think
Confessions are coming.
over.
I can't hear you very well. Are you using an earpiece?
Let me disconnect.
Can everybody hear Miracle very well?
I was using my Bluetooth speaker. So I just wanted to go over it again, like the whole graduating student thing. I missed all of it because the call came in.
Okay. So what I'm saying is when you do array.pop, it returns, it removes the last element from your array. It doesn't matter what array it is or where the array is coming from. It will return the last element. But it will not just stop there. It will also return the value of that last element it removed so that you can know what was removed, provided the fact that you were not the one that created the initial data you were working with. Maybe it's from a third-party API or from a third-party library that you are just calling the data to use it inside of your program. So you can be aware and know what was being removed from the array, so you can be you can access that if you want to. So when you do array.pop, just know that primarily it will do two things. First of all, it removes the last element of the existing array. Then two, it will now return the value of what is removed to you, that you can access it if you need it or not. So because it returns a value, that value is what we are storing inside of the repeating student variable. So we are storing the value returned from this method that we are calling. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, so that's for pop. So for push actually puts a new element inside of the existing array, and here the new element is our new student coming from a different school that's supposed to join the new session of this new class. You get the point. So now we are pushing this new student inside of this graduating students array. And now when we console.log graduating student, we now see that a new student, which is student with number 9, has been added to the array, and that's what we are seeing here in the console. So pop removes the last element, push adds an element to the end of an array. So they do two different operations like that. Does that make sense? So pop removes the last element. Hello.
Okay, it's clear now.
Yeah. So is it clear for everybody now?
Yes, sir.
For every single person. Precious, Mr. Precious, is it clear for you guys too? Abigail, you're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So that's what. Okay. I'm just asking if it's clear for you guys. So this is pushing, and when I push, I don't have to do console.log of what I'm pushing. I just did a console.log to let you know the value that is being returned from when I pushed. So you can see here we are still performing the same very kind of operation. So let me comment out all of this so that we get access to our original array. So here let's deal with another array. So after after pop, push, and so on, let me just kind of show you the prototype of the array again, just to let you know one other thing we have available. So we have pop, we have push, and you know that pop and push are basically what's it called? They do the exact opposite of what one does, the exact opposite of what the other does, right? So here we have pop, we have push, right? Then there is also there's another one I'm trying to show you. So we have on shift. So on shift is very similar to push, and let me just show you, because while we are talking about removing elements from the array, so I want to show you that, and I'm actually showing you from here so that you can see where it is coming from. It's not coming from a strange place, or maybe just coming from the fact that maybe I've already learned too much. You can always open up the prototype of any array or any object and find out what is available for you to be able to use inside of it. Does that make sense? So here, let's say we don't want to remove the last element. Let's say, okay, this is just a random set of numbers, and now we realize that the repeating student actually happens to be at the beginning of the list. It's not at the end of the list. So what we can do, instead of doing pop, we can do array.onShift. And what onShift does basically is onShift basically insert a new element at the start of a new array and returns the new length of the array. Okay, onShift is is actually similar to push, not this thing. Okay, I was actually mistaking that with them. I thought it removes from the beginning of the array, but instead it puts to the beginning of the array. So while push adds to the end of the array, onShift puts to the beginning of the array. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So when I save this now, yeah, we have 9. So when we do onShift, the 9 is not going to be at the end of the array. It's going to be at the beginning of the array. So you can see we have 9, 1, 2, 3, 4. So onShift puts the new element at the beginning of the array, not at the end of the array. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I was going to show you onShift. So let's also deal with something else, and that's finding check if an element exists in an array. And it's very important for you to know that this only occurs for primitive data types. Let me remove this disable for JavaScript. Okay, this only happens for primitive data types, because when you have a more complex structure in your array, like more like having objects, what we are about to learn now might not be very useful for you, but for now let's just try to check if that element exists in the array. So we are trying to see if maybe a particular user exists in our array. So we are going to say const let's say exists. So this method is going to result is supposed to what's it called, consolidate to a boolean value, of course. So we're going to say if it includes, and what we want to search is the element, so the number from index of search element from index. So we will do if it includes 2, and then let's console.log exist. Does that make sense? So includes does what? Determines whether an array includes a certain element, returning true or false as appropriate. Does that make sense? That's what include does. So you can always hover on top if you are not still sure to determine whether an array includes an element. So it could be any element inside of this array. So when I say exist and includes, if I say graduate students dot includes, and remember includes is also inside of the prototype object, so it's not something that I'm making up. So if you check here, you will see that we have includes, right? So when I do graduate student dot includes to, does it include it or not?
It includes it, yeah.
So when I save, we get true, right? Because it includes. So let's say I say 12. It doesn't include 12, so we get false. So what the program we had before, what we actually what happened was that for you to be able to check if a correct answer already exists, and we already declared an array to track that. Whenever we get a correct answer, we can do this correct array dot push, right, from what we've learned so far. Is that correct? Then to check if a person already gave a correct answer, then we can now say correct array dot includes that new user input. Then it will give you true or false whether or not that value has already been added before. Does that make sense now? Hello? Does it?
No, sir, please come again.
Okay. So remember, let's assume that this is the user input that we've been working with before. Let's say this is the user input. Remember that for every time the user enters a new input, I told you that, okay, in order to stop the user from entering the same value over and over, let us push whatever correct answer the user has already entered inside of an array, right? Do you get that part?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that is what Topic calls here in our program correct array. So the correct array is meant to track only the correct values. So that means when a value is correct, what do we want to do? We want to push that value inside of the array, right?
Yes, sir.
So we'll do correct array dot push the user input that is correct, only if the user input is correct. If it is not correct, we don't want to push it inside of the correct array because it is not correct by the way, right? We are only interested in the fact that we don't want the user to be able to use the same number to win 2 times. So here we have correct array. So whenever the user input is correct, which is inside of this block, this vector should push. So should have pushed. So correct array dot push, that is user input. If it is correct, that is if number, user input is equal to random number 1 or 2 or 3, then want to push that random number, or sorry, user input rather, into the correct array, element. Does that make sense? So when we push it, that means on the next iteration of the program, that input is already in the array. So we can now check if the array contains that element. And how do we do that? We use includes, right? We check if correct array includes that particular user input that we are talking about now. And if it is true, that means the user has already gotten that answer correctly before, that it needs to use another number to win this round. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Are you sure? God help us. Okay, our stream is still working. Laura, I see you are struggling so much with the network. Is everything okay from your end?
It's not okay, but I'll watch the replay.
Okay, so just make tracking the replay a priority, please, so that we don't lose it. But everything is okay so far. Okay, so you can see what I'm doing with the push and application of the push, which is in the program we had before, right? There's an application of the push where you can track if a correct answer has already been used before. Then if it is used, you add it here. Then on the next iteration, you check if this array includes what the user is just entering now. Does that make sense? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Sir, please come again. Yes, sir.
Okay. So I said we are tracking whether or not the user has entered a number, right, that is correct before. Because the way the program works is that you are not supposed to be able to enter one single number and use it to win on 2 tries, right? It doesn't make sense. That's like cheating, right? You are not supposed to be able to do that in any reasonable program. Like, okay, for instance, you are supposed to have 5 guesses and you use one number to guess 5 times and you got that 5 times correctly with one number. That doesn't make sense, right? Isn't that correct? Yes, so you want to keep track of the fact of whether or not a number has been used to win a round before. And if a number has been used to win a round before, you don't want to ever use that number. Allow the user to use that number to win again. So that's the assignment I gave to you guys. So what I'm saying here is that we know that with array we can store a sequence of different values. Isn't that correct? We can store a sequence of different values, whether it is number, boolean, string, object, or whatever. We can store them inside of an array. So I said with an array we can always add we can always decide to add the user input that is correct inside of an array that tracks correct numbers alone, so that when a number is correct, we use that push array method to push that number inside of the array. Do you get it up to that point?
Yes, sir, I do.
Yes. So that means a user got a number. If it is correct, we push it into the array. We don't do anything else. We just congratulate the user. Okay, you've gotten one round. Then on the next iteration of the array, what do we do now? Even if the user's input is correct, we want to check if it is still that same input that the user entered before, because people can be very cunning and very subtle in their dealings. So what we want to do is we want to check that array. I want to check if that array includes the previous input, or if the previous answer, the new input is already included in the array. Does that make sense? If the current input of the user, whether it is correct or not, we want to check if the correct array, which is a tracker of all of our correct numbers, if the new input or exists in the array already, then we want to say you've used this number before, try a different number. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So that's what we are doing basically. So we already know that, okay, for every array we are able to add new elements programmatically, and that's how do we do that? We use what method? We use the push method, right, to add elements programmatically inside of our array. Isn't that correct? Then to check if an element exists, of course, it's very easy to know if an element exists online once 735. I can look at it with my eyes and know that okay, 2 exists, 3 exists. But what if it is 1 million numbers or 10,000 numbers or 200,000 numbers? Definitely you want to be able to programmatically do that. So the includes method already does that for you. So it will check if the element you are passing inside of it exists in the array. And if it exists, what does it do? It will return true. Do you get the point? So now we know that we can use the if to check or not, and whether or not an input is already existing inside of this correct and correct array. So we can do correct array dot includes, right? If it includes user input, then we want to say you have already used this number before. Use a different number. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So it's that's how it works basically. That's what you did, but what you did that wasn't 100% was the fact that you shouldn't have been pushing correct answer before you check if an answer is correct, because here you push inside of a correct array but you don't even know if the input is correct or not, because this is where you get to know if the input is correct. It is inside of this if block. Does that make sense? You only find out inside of this if block. You can't find out if an answer is correct outside of this if block, because this is how you are knowing if an answer is correct, right? So that means you pushing into correct array should be inside of the if block where you are checking if an answer is correct.
Okay.
You get the point? So that was what I said.
So should I put that line of like where the else correct array dot push should have been before the alert. Keep it up.
Hello.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
I'm saying I was asking that, so that correct array dot push should have been before the alert. Keep it up. You got it right.
Yeah, okay. It could even be after the alert, but as long as it's inside this if block where you track the correct entry, it will be fine. As long as it's inside of this block. You get the point?
Yes.
Yeah. So you should put it, because you are only adding
correct. Right? Okay.
You are only adding correct answers. You are not interested in an answer that is not correct. So your correct array should not include any input from the user other than the correct one. Do you get the point?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that's the point. So basically, programmatically, you can add a new
Can you
element.
check what you said, sir? Please can you check the replay? I don't find it.
The replay?
The live. Yes.
I think it is still on.
I've checked and I can't find it.
The link is in the chat. Let me re-add it.
Okay, sir.
Okay, that's it. So does it make sense now? So includes pop, push, on shift. So those are all very useful methods that you can use.
So it's giving the video is giving an error message that the video is private, video unavailable.
Are you serious?
Yes, sir.
But from my end here, everything actually is still okay.
Maybe you should refresh your network or something. It's not loading.
It shows that the video is private.
Private. Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me try and sort that. How come? Okay, private. Okay. Okay, so that's fine now. You can see it now. Check again.
Yes, it's working now.
Thank you. Okay, so that's that. So you can add elements, and that's what methods are for, basically, for you to be able to do this kind of operations. Just imagine if something like this doesn't exist. Imagine what you would need to do to be able to remove this element from the array. It's almost even impossible for you to be able to do that, because definitely you have to fall back to original built-in JavaScript methods and functions for you to be able to do that. You get the point? So we are tracking exists. So there's another array method. Yeah. So let's say we want to be able to because I said arrays are index based, right? and they start from the index of 0. So that means 1 is at the index of 0, then we have an index, 2 is at the index of 1, 3 is at the index of 2, 4 is at the index of 3, 5 is at the index of 4, 6 is at the index of 5, 7 is at the index of 6, 8 is at the index of 7. And what I mean by that is that when you start counting and start referencing the elements in your array, you want to start from 0. You start counting from 0 basically. So we can try to find what the index of a particular element is in an array. Does that make sense? So you can use that for positioning and so on. Let's say this is not just any, let's disrupt the normal sequence of these numbers. Let's say 13, 12, and let's say these are all student IDs, maybe like math numbers basically. So let's say 54 and 75, 76. So let's say we have this. So now we know that, okay, we want to target the user, 33, and we want to know what position the user is. Let's say this is the position of the users. Let's say this is the first position, this is the second position, this is the third one and fourth one. So we want to know the user and the student with the ID of math number of 33. We want to know what their position is. So here's what you need to do to that. So let's say let me comment it. Get the index of an element in an array. So just consider the index of an element like more like the address of that element in that array. So everybody should have an address, whether an email address or Gmail address or whatever address you have. But everybody should have everybody's entitled to have an address. So people should be able to find it somewhere. So we can have are you with me? Hello. So we have let's say specific student. So let's say just the specific student position. I don't mind the naming. I'm naming these things, but you can always use whatever name. So let's say graduating student at the index of, I want to find at the index of a number. So let's say at the index of, let's say 3. So this one is going to what? The value to locate in the array. So we want to locate the value 33, which exists in our array. It will return the index of the first occurrence of the value of that value in an array, or it returns -1 if that value does not exist in the array. Does that make sense? So what is the index of 33? It is at index of 0, 1, 2, right? So when we console.log specific student, so when we save it, it returns 2. So that's telling you that this specific student with the ID of 33, holds the second position in the array. Does that make sense? Technically the third position, but the index of 2. The index of 2 is the third position basically. Does that make sense for you guys?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's what index of does. So let's say we are looking for a number that doesn't exist in the array. Let's say a number like, let's say 4. 4 does not exist. So if we save this, what it will return is -1. So if an index does not exist in an array, it will return -1 by default for any value whatsoever. But if the index exists, it returns the index of that particular value. And this is not just for numbers. You could also use a string, maybe like my name. You get the point? So you could return the index of my name, and it still gives you the index of my name. So the index of my name is what? 6, right? So are you guys seeing that? Hello?
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's the index of my name. So it's not just the index of numbers you can find. You can also find the index of alphabet, strings. But you can't find the in-depth of, arrays can contain other arrays and objects. So you can't use things like this to find the index of, complex data types like that. You get the point? As well as includes. You can't use the include because when you start working with objects, you might want to do, if your array includes an object, it won't find it for you. It only works with primitive data types. Does that make sense? there are other advanced methods for you to be able to do operations on whether your and when your array contains objects and other complex data types. There are other methods you could use to find complex data types inside of your array, but you can't use index of on non-primitive data types, definitely, and you can't use includes for non-primitive data types. Does that make sense? So once again, index of what finds the index of a particular value inside of your array, and returns the index of that value. Does that make sense? Hello? Hello?
So please come again. What did you say?
So I said the index of method actually finds the index of a particular value in your array. So when it finds that value in your array, it will return the index of that value in your array. So let's say we have let me comment this, bring this back. So let's say we are looking for the index of, let's say 8 for instance, or let's say, let me return my name so that it's going to be clear as a string. So specific student definitely now is what? The index of 6. So I can still come down here and say console.log graduating students at the index of, remember we use bracket notation to get elements from an array, specific student. So when we do that, guess what it is going to return? It's going to return the element at that index. It returns my name, right? Which is what's at that index. So basically we are able to access the index, using the index of method, and we are able to access that particular property. So you might want to use things like this when you have a very dynamic data type and you are just looking for a particular index or where a particular element exists inside of the array. Then you can always use that index to access or do that particular element again, or do whatever it is you want to do with that element or the array in general. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this brings us to the next array method. Okay, so let's use the index that we've got in here. So specific student, remember the specific student will find the index of my name. So my name is more like an ISO. It exists inside of an array of numbers. Maybe we don't want this to be inside of a number, right? We want it to be we want this array to be just purely numbers. We don't want that string inside of it. So let's find the index of my name, which is, we know that that's the only number inside of it, and then let's do something with it. So let's remove, remember we've done pop removes the last element from an array, right? So there's another array method, and that array method is so let's say graduating student dot splice. So that's another array method. So here, zero-based location in the array from which to start removing elements. So remove the element from an array. If necessary, insert a new one. So we can remove the element here. So we can remove at the index of specific student. So we can pass an index where we want it to start removing elements from, and the second parameter we pass in is how many elements we want it to remove. So let's add the specific student value that we created, and then let's remove that one. So let's console.log graduating students again, and let's see what we get. So we get what? You see, we don't have my name anymore, right? We don't have that anymore because we've used this splice method to remove my name, because we got the index of my name and we are removing it with the splice method. Does that make sense? Or that one is somehow, right? It's somehow. Is it somehow? Hello?
So why did you add the number one after the specific?
Okay, so you just like I read what the method does. It removes an element, removes elements from the array, not necessarily one element. It removes elements from the array. So the first parameter you pass in is the index of the element you want to remove. The second one is how many elements you want it to remove starting from that index. Do you get the point? So when I passed in 1, it will remove the element on that specific index. If I pass in 2, it's going to remove 2 elements starting from that index. So let's see now. So you can see here 8 doesn't exist anymore. So it starts from this index and removes 2 elements, 1 and 2. Does that make sense? So I can have another element, let's say 9 for instance. So if I save this, it removes 1 and 2. I can see 9 is still there, but 8 and my name are no longer there. Does that make sense? So this number could vary. It's basically how many elements you want to remove from here, and you will use these things to do very amazing stuff. As you write your program, just keep what they do at the back of your mind. When you write a program, definitely on a particular day, these methods will come to mind when you need to do specific things. It would have been so difficult if you don't to be able to solve those problems if you don't have this method at the back of your mind. So you have to know that, okay, these methods exist. Or even if you don't know if a method exists, definitely you want to always Google, okay, how do I do this in an array? And you will be surprised that there's already a method that already exists in the prototype of an array that will help you be able to do that particular thing. So here, we have splice, removing an element starting from the index you pass in, and the second parameter you pass in the number of elements you want to remove from it. Does that make sense? So by the way, the delete count is an optional argument. You don't necessarily have to pass in delete count. So if you don't pass in delete count, it just removes everything else after that particular index. Does that make sense? But you might want to explicitly say, okay, remove just one element, and that's going to be the element whose index was passed in. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now we've cleaned our array. We don't have that ugly looking string inside of it anymore. So remember, why didn't we use pop for this one? Because pop removes an element from an array as well, right? Why didn't we use pop? Can anybody answer that?
Because pop removes the last element in the array.
Exactly.
It does not
Splice remove a specific element.
Yeah, exactly. That's the correct answer. Splice, you can target what element you want to remove, but pop is just fixed to the last element alone. You get the point. So here we have splice, removing elements, and then adding the count of the elements you want to remove. So it's as simple as that. It cannot be it can be more difficult than that. More difficult. It can be it doesn't get harder than that, basically, than what we just explained now. Is it okay? Hello? Okay.
Sorry, sir. Before we can use splice, we must name an index of before. We can just add any element.
You can add any index you like. You can just add index.
Can I say? Okay. Can I say graduating student dot splice then 12 then comma 1?
Yeah, but
can I name a particular element I want to remove directly?
This is not the element you are trying to remove. This is the index of the element you are trying to remove. So 12, if you want to remove 12, it is, what do you think you will put?
I'll put 1.
Yes, because that's the index of 12. So if you do 1, then it gets rid of 1 for
you. So splice indirectly works with index of?
Yes, the first parameter is the index of what you are trying to remove. So let's say you want to dynamically get that element, then you can use index of to find the element. But if it's something that you want to by yourself inspect the element, which is not a good practice for a developer or a programmer to do, definitely want to automatically do most of the things you want to do, even if you can physically apparently do it with your normal head. Definitely eventually you'll be dealing with more complex kind of data, and you don't want to. The reason why you decided to learn how to code is because you don't want to be using calculator to do most of the things you do. You want to programmatically do all of the things you are doing. So that's why you want to be able to be conversant with the methods and everything available to you, so that you can use them to solve your problem in such a way that you don't have to keep repeating yourself over and over. Instead, the program repeats itself and you have to write it just once. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that's splice. So splice has a brother. So let's keep the index still. So instead of splice, we also have another array method. So let's do graduating students dot slice. Yeah. So we have slice. What slice does is that the beginning index of the portion of the array, if the start is undefined and the slice begins at the index of 0. So what it does is it returns a copy of a section of the array for both the start and the end index. So let's see what that does for us. So let's say at the index of 2, right? An index of 2 is number 33, and then the end index. Okay, let's just deal with this alone first. So let's call this let new array. or let's say shortlisted. So let's do console.log here. So let's save that. So you can see here that it starts from the and starts from the index we pass in. We pass in the index of 2 and create a new array from that index till the end of the array. Does that make sense? So it's basically we are returning a new array from that existing array, but we are just passing the index of that array when we want to start from. We don't want the entire array. We just want to start from the index of 2 and then at the index of 5. Then it returns those elements for us. So it starts from, we have 2, 3, 4, sorry. So we have at the index of 0, 1, 2. So 33 included 2, 3, 4, 5. So it returns everything between, what's it called? 2 and 5. It doesn't include the last element, the last index. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, sir.
So you see what it does basically. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So you can also use a negative index, and that's to indicate that the offset should start from the end of the array. So if we do index of -2 to 5, so see what is going to happen. What's that? -2. So you can see -2 actually started from the back of the array. It picked 8 and 9. So we can do -3. So it did my name 8 and 9. So when you use a negative index, it will begin to copy from the back of the array. Does that make sense? So you can just also at your own time take a look at all of these methods. But I think these basically are the primary things that they do for you. I don't know if you have any question at this point. Hello. Hello.
So, sir, so slice also works with index of.
Yes, definitely. So let's say I want to create a new array from, okay, let's say I have all of this array. Then the last couple of elements in the array are just strings. You get the point? So I have my address. So let's say I want to programmatically get the array of strings out of the general array. Let's say this is a general array. Does that make sense? So I already know where the index of my name is, and I know my name is the beginning of the string part of the array, right? So I can always come here and say, okay, specific student, and I want to do that till the end. Do you get it? So it gets me the string part of the array. I'm just showing you an application of what I'm talking about. So I can copy out this part of the array because I know the structure of the data. So I copy out this part of the array by just finding the index of the beginning of that part of the array. Then I'm getting a new array out of it using the splice method. Does that make sense? So you can use it with the index of method. So the index of is just for you to be able to get the index dynamically if you don't want to inspect by yourself with your eyes. You get the point? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Does it make sense?
Okay.
I can hear you. Were you trying to say something?
Yes, sir.
Go on. You're really trying to talk. I don't think.
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. I think your network is breaking.
Okay, but can you guys hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So that's what splice does. I'm trying to get another array method. So here, let me just comment what that does basically. So we have start and then here index of get index of an array. So splice. What does splice do? Can anybody remind me again?
It allows us to remove specific elements from an array, and if necessary, insert a new element in its place.
Yeah. Specific element of an array. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. So let's take a look at some other array methods. Are you guys still with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's okay, I don't want to do okay, let me do this. So basically there's another method we can use to combine two arrays together. So let's say we have graduating students and then we have repeating students basically. So let's say we have graduating students, then we have repeating students. So let's say we have 9988 77. So there's actually a method you can use to add two arrays together basically. Remember when you are doing strings, you can basically do console.log, something like string A, and you can do plus string B, right? And that's just what is that? What did I do? Reference J, did I? 746. 746. Oh, I typed something by mistake. So you can see string A plus string B. So he added two of them together. So in the case of an array, you can also add an array together. So what we can do here is we can say let's new array, new class equal to. So we can say graduating student dot concat. I can see additional arrays or items to add to the end of the array. Does that make sense? So you can add a new array or add new elements to here. So combines two or more array. This method returns a new array without modifying the existing array. So we can add repeating students inside of this. So let's do a console.log. And let's save that. So you can see now we have two of the arrays combined together using the concat method. Does that make sense? Hello. And you can see that we don't just pass in arrays alone, we also pass in ordinary values as well inside concat. So it does something similar to push, just that this one gives you a more powerful way to add things to the array in such a way that you don't just add single elements this time. You can also add an entire array. So say combine two or more arrays, or you can also add elements to the end of an array, and then returns. But this one does not alter the original array, it creates a new array for you actually. Does that make sense? It doesn't modify the existing array.
Go right again, please.
Okay. So, but you understand the fact that we can use concat to add these two arrays together, right? So it's just basically referencing the first array, the one that you want to be the base array, which is graduating student. Then you do dot concat, which is a method available in the prototype. It's here. So you can see concat is here. So it's not, I didn't come up with it. So concat, then you can add a new array that you just created, or your choice array that you want to include at the end of that existing array. So you can see the first array is 10 down to my address, right? Then the new array is 99, 88, and 77. So you can see they are all together now. So instead of having a length of was this 7 we had before, or 9 elements in our array, we now have 12 elements inside of our array. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so and I said you don't just add arrays as well, you can also add singular values inside of with your concat to an array. It's still going to work just the same, which is similar to what array.push does. Do you get that? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So basically, and you can see that most of the things you can almost start foreseeing the fact that you will be needing all of these methods most of the time, because if you will be programming will be basically for you, for programmers is basically it's to what extent you can actually manipulate data and alter data structures and create new data and engage with data, use data for whatever purposes you want. So that's why you should really take seriously all of these methods that I'm showing to you, and including the ones that I probably will not show to you because of the scope of because of a time constraint. But if you discover any new array methods, or there's you have questions regarding any array method, you can always ask me later. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but everything so far, I hope it has been clear.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so with what I've shown you so far, I think you should be able to tackle that assignment again. Or you're not sure still?
Yes, I think I should be able to try.
Where you drag yes. Don't worry, you can actually.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So yeah. So that's it. So basically I was going to teach you data structures and teach you an in-depth idea about arrays and objects, but I think we'll continue that tomorrow. So I think we've already learned so much for tonight, which I think you should also spend a lot of time trying to experiment with these things and trying new things with them as well. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so is there any question?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any question at this point? Hello? Questions? No questions. Okay, see what you're going to do for me. Finish the assignment I gave to you and then look at this array prototype, and I think this is what we really need to do now. So what you're going to do for me is that all of these prototypes, I want you to write out what they do for me, what they are used for. We've covered some of them, but let's talk about them. Like create a document, or you could also create an MD file with replit, like a .md file with replit, and submit it there, please. Can you do that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you can always go to MDN. So I think that's how we can actually have in-depth conversations. Go to MDN for each of them, as well as W3 schools.
Yes, to my network.
Okay, so what I will do, I will just articulate the assignment on the WhatsApp group as well. So in case you can't hear me very well now, you should be able to hear me then. So that's fine, guys. I'm ending the stream now, and I think it's been a productive evening. Thank you very much, guys. And that's pretty much. Do you have any questions at this point? If you have, please let me know.